Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're going to be doing something a little different in this video, and that is installing a decoder into this locomotive. You can use a drop-in style for the Kato F units, like what you can see here. However, I would have had to solder in a LED into the rear one. I did try to use this one that I had, but it never really worked right from when I got it, and it wasn't running when I was testing it, and figured that I'm just going to give up and put in a new decoder. At first, I had thought to just get the drop-in one, and then remembered I'd have to shorten the LED that was already in there, add a second LED, and if I was already going to do that, I just figured I would get a DN136D decoder and just hardwire it. Since I have hardwired another decoder, that video may come out. I don't know for sure. It's kind of up in the air with the quality of it, but we'll see how that comes out. I need to go through and edit it a little bit. But what I started off with was getting the LEDs, as you can see here, and cutting them to be the length that I needed and that would fit into the locomotive. I then cut down some resistors and then got everything tinned and ready to go with some solder, as you can see here. And I was careful with the LEDs, as when I had tried to do some smaller runs with this type of LED, it ended up causing some issues, and the heat on it actually melted the solder up at the LED itself. And so I just was careful to do all of the soldering with getting the resistor onto the LEDs and then actually tinning the LED itself. Once I got the resistor onto the LEDs, I went through and tested and make sure that they were ready for and actually were working with a 9-volt battery. I then had a few wires that were soldered onto the motor tabs already from the previous installation attempt and took those off that you could see kind of just a couple seconds ago. I then took the strips that were the pickup from the trucks, and where it was just copper pieces running along the sides of the locomotive, I decided I was just going to add a little bead of solder and then solder the wires coming from the decoder to there, and then that way it was going to be a good reliable pickup from both trucks and save me a little bit of time. I just followed what was in the instructions and did the red wire to the right side of the engine and the black wire to the left side of the engine. I was lucky in that with this Kato locomotive, it did have arrows pointing towards which way was front and back. And then I just made an educated guess that with the motor tabs, it was going to be the same polarity or same way that it needed to be soldered into as well. And so I used the orange wire on the right side motor tab pickup and then the gray wire on the left side motor tab pickup. Luckily, that turned out to be the right way for the decoder, and that forward was forward, reverse was reverse, and so I didn't have to go back in and unsolder and swap the wires. The other thing that I realized is, when I didn't mention this earlier, to strip the wires from the decoder, I just used my fingers and fingernails to kind of strip it off. The insulation is very thin, and it's just easy enough to do it that way instead of getting some strippers that will work. I then went through and got the LEDs wired up to the correct wires that they were supposed to be for. And that's that the blue wire is common for the two LEDs. And then the white is for the forward LED. And then yellow is for the rear LED. I didn't do anything with the green, which is function 1. I didn't strip it down or cut it or anything. I ended up just leaving it the full length and kind of wrapping it around to help kind of keeps the wires organized in a way, and felt that, it would work the best. I also used Kapton tape to wrap around everything, make sure that nothing would be bare or out that could then in turn cause a short and ruin anything. And then once I got all of that put together, I took the chassis out to the layout and tested it. And here you can see that the light and the motors are working for forward and reverse. So it was actually after I had tested it was then when I started to wrap everything with Kapton tape, just to, again, make sure that nothing would touch and short anything out. I also attempted to use hot glue to keep the LEDs in place and not move around in the chassis or, just keep still. Unfortunately, as I was doing the button up of the locomotive and getting the shell onto it, I ran into a few problems in that I couldn't get the LED to sit into a spot that would, keep it out of the way of things. And so I ended up just taking the hot glue off and scrapping that idea. Once I got all of the Kapton tape in, I ended up starting to button up the locomotive and getting the top shell onto it. I didn't film that as I found that I had a lot of time wasted in that, at least that filming of it. And what I had first originally done was put some Kapton tape over the flywheels, I think is what it is, to try and keep things from being pushed down into those sections of the locomotive. That worked, but in the essence of it kept things out of it, but it didn't work, and that the tape ended up sticking to the flywheel, and then the locomotive wouldn't drive. So I came back and took the tape out. I still had a few issues of things getting into that space and binding up the motor parts. And so what I ended up doing is I had a kit that I didn't use all of the window plastic that was there for it, and it ended up being thinner than any styrene I had. And so you can see me every now and then readjust it and put some into the locomotive, and just used some thin strips to keep things out from those spaces. It worked really well, and it stopped things from getting into there. But every now and then I was still having some issues, and realized that the light pipes were kind of keeping things from closing down onto the locomotive all the way, meaning the shell, and ended up just cutting off some of the rear light pipe to let the decoder fit a little nicer and keep the shell in and, closed nice and tightly, have minimal gaps to it, and it, worked out with the LEDs. I also had to move the front LED just a little bit because it was catching on the light pipe as well, but I ended up not needing to cut that. So we'll end this video with the train running around the layout a little bit. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.